Hey everybody, good evening. My name is Melissa and I'm hosting tonight's live stream where we are starting a conversation about how to make sense of the new AP World Modern course and exam description that the College Board has just released to us teachers, and we all need to wrap our heads around before school starts, for some of us in not too terribly long. So welcome to everybody who is live with us tonight. And yeah, let's jump right in. Like I said, my name is Melissa. I teach in Olympia, Washington. So I'm out on the West Coast. I've been teaching AP World now for, I think this is my 7th year teaching AP World. So I've been through now 3 revisions to the course. I wish I could say it's starting to feel easier, but it's really not. We're going to be joined by a few other voices as we get going tonight. So welcome to everybody, and we'll go ahead and get started. I put up a poll. It looks like we've already got some votes in. Looks like some folks have had a chance to read through the CED. And some of you haven't yet. And I don't blame you if you're waiting for your hard copy to come in the binder. Me too. I'm waiting for my hard copy. It will be so much easier than trying to read through that whole thing as a PDF, or, you know, bust your school printing budget trying to print it all out. But I've got some thoughts, some things that I've started working on to show you, as well as some conversation points that I'd love to get people talking about. So feel free to participate in the chat. Feel free to ask questions. And let's get rolling with some things. All right, here we go. Share some slides with you. All right. So the first thing I have is just a handful of links. At the bottom of your screencast tonight, there is a link to this whole slide deck so that you can see some of the things that I'm referring to, some of the things that I'm talking about. The top link is an overview of the changes to our course from a kind of all-encompassing survey of world history from 8000 BCE to the present, and now those changes to what we're calling now AP World Modern. So if you just want a summary of changes, that first link on this slide will take you to it. The second link is the actual course and exam description, the CED, that was just published and uploaded by the College Board. It is a lengthy document. If you are attending a summer institute, you'll get a hard copy at your summer institute. Or if you are an AP World teacher, you can order one for free from the College Board on the College Board website. And like I said, I'm a kind of an old-fashioned girl. I like a hard copy. So I would encourage you to do that. The last link there is my very, very rough draft on something I'm going to show you a little bit later in the slide deck here, which are some rough draft attempts at creating a 1-page unit outline handout that I could give to students. I know some folks are really into the new unit outlines and some folks are really not. So let's talk about what are the big changes to the course. And to talk about some of the big changes with me, I'm going to invite a couple more people to join us. Some folks who've also done a lot of work thinking about AP World History, thinking about what these changes are or are not. So Dylan, I'm going to have you come join us if you want on screen, and we can chat a little bit about some of the big changes that are showing up in this new course and exam description. How's it going, Dylan?
Oh, I'm live. Hi. Hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. Awesome.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, so let's just talk through some of the big changes. I mean, I think we all know by now the big one, that we're chopping off a few thousand years of world history.
Just goodbye.
Yeah. My students, I'm still in school right now. My students were talking about today. They said, "Wait, what do you mean they don't get to learn about units 1 and 2?" So yeah, that's a big change. We're also dropping from 6 time periods to 4 time periods. I noticed the original announcement for this big change had us starting at 1450, and so I'm pretty stoked to see that we got to preserve at least a little bit more world history going back to 1200. Are you satisfied with that kind of compromise there, Dylan, or are you still pretty bummed?
I mean, I'm definitely not like, I'd rather it start at 8,000,
Yeah.
but it's better than 1450. I'm just curious as to the actual periodization of 1200. Like, I'd understand if they chose like 1250 for like, the fall of the Abbasids, or like, or like 600 for Islam, but like 1200 just seems like this awkward, like kind of like Mongol-y, like what's really like, it's kind of like 1450 makes sense, and then it just follows the rest of AP World. But like 1200 just doesn't seem like, it seems like they're just almost like, all right, they want some period 3. It's just kind of like,
Yeah.
Like they kind of just threw, and I'm not like mad at it in the sense that it'll allow teachers to teach at least some things about like Southernization and the growth of empires and stuff. But I definitely see concern in terms of context for students, since like, for me, I didn't learn specific world history until AP World, which I took as a freshman. So like if I didn't come into that class really knowing much besides what I did in my summer work. And so like if a student comes in not knowing basic religions or the foundations of empires or basic like cultural terms, I can see that really harming a lot of students.
And that's a place, I think, where teachers, we're all in this weird boat where we're 1200. I don't think it's an arbitrary choice. I'm sure somebody out there has a rationale for it, but it is, I think it's just a year that got picked. I don't think it's tied to something in particular. And it is circa 1200, so it gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Because the course and exam description for East Asia, for example, suggests starting with the Song dynasty, which emerges much earlier than the 1200s. And so I think it's that like wiggle room piece where some schools are going to start at 600. Some schools are going to just forget the new CED and teach the class the way that they've always been doing. And yeah, I do know that the first unit suggested in the CED directs teachers to teach about world religions, to teach about some of those big contextual things. But I think the big challenge right now for teachers is how to tackle that pre-1200 vast span of time in a way that is meaningful, but doesn't consume so much time that that doesn't work. Eric in the chat is reminding us that Mansa Musa and Mali are important. So African civilizations, which are unfortunately too often neglected in both texts and history standards, but are a really important part of global history. And some of those civilizations push us back to 1200 or even earlier. Yeah. The other thing I notice about the time periods, even though we're down to 4, and you're right, they do follow what we've had before, units 3, 4, or 2, 3, and 4 now, is that they all have the same names. The time period titles are the same as they were in the old course and exam description. So we've lopped off a huge chunk of time, but we haven't changed the thematic emphasis, at least according to the College Board. The intended thematic emphasis for each of these units remains the same, for good or for ill. I think there's some real positives to that. I think that there's also some real weirdness as we get into the later units, for sure. So along with the time periods, one of the other big changes is we got a new theme. We had 5 themes before, and we have the new theme number 6, technology and innovation. Previously, technology was linked up in the culture theme and the environmental theme. But now it has its own theme, which it's about time. There have been so many questions on previous AP exams asking specifically about technology that, we might as well tell students up front that this is something that's important enough. And I see a bunch of other people already have my acronym ready to go. Also, yep, septic. I'm going with spiced tea because my My students are really into it, but septic's pretty funny. Yeah, so we're adding a new theme, pulling it all together. Still a lot of overlap in the themes, and the themes overlap with the key concepts and the new learning objectives. Ooh, Aisha, I like inspect. That's a cool one. I also see people like in pirates. Eric wants to know, do kids these days know about Ice-T? Some of them definitely do. He appears in enough memes that I think people are still into that. I think the acronym we choose doesn't really matter. I think it's just acknowledging that we got a new theme, paying attention to that, good stuff. And then the kind of the biggie as we look through the course and exam description is that the College Board is making a huge push to move away from organizing the course by key concepts and towards some suggested units. These are suggestions, not requirements. So if you are a person who's like, I hate these units, you don't have to use them. But the key concept list that we are familiar with from the previous CEDs will not be in the published CED. And there's no clear date on when that document, that appendix as they're calling it, will be available online. I've been looking for it because I like to live by the key concepts, but College Board's not big on them, it seems like, in this new revision. Sean Harris-Kampf, who's really active in the AP World History teacher community on the College Board website, created a document detailing major changes from the old key concepts to the new key concepts. I found it to be a really helpful document for starting some of my own work. And if you're a person who's really familiar with those old key concepts, his document would be really helpful in that AP World History teacher community. So these new units, there'll be 9 suggested units. Each unit has suggested learning objectives, suggested skills, suggested themes, how to break down the unit. The world religions are, like I said, folded into Unit 1 as a foundation for understanding world history. There's good and bad. So, Alan, I see that you're asking about in the chat about the Facebook page. The page I'm referring to is on the College Board website specifically. Not very many people, I think, use it all that much, but there's an AP World History Teachers forum on the College Board website that you could access through your audit page, and that's where this particular document I was talking about is located. Although I think Sean's pretty active in the Facebook group. If you search for AP World History Teachers, you have to ask permission to get into the group, but it's pretty awesome in terms of resources and conversations that people are having. So, sweet, Caleb's coming through for us with a link. Fantastic. In addition to the new units, just a change I want to make mention of, because I would love it if anybody knows anything about this and could share about it in the chat, is the online resources that are supposed to be coming available sometime in August. The CED makes reference to progress checks with multiple choice, short answer, and long essay options for students, which I'm super stoked about in theory. I haven't seen any of them yet, and I won't until August because I didn't get picked as a beta tester. So if you were a beta tester and know anything about them, please comment. I would love to hear about what these things look like. I'm really excited. Course changes are a pain. I am excited about new resources though, and access to new materials to help my students practice, because that's something that we've definitely struggled with in my classes. I also, before we start thinking about criticism, which there's a lot to talk about, I like the integration of learning objectives, skills, and themes in the unit guide. I think for new teachers, this is going to be a really helpful starting place because the developers of the CED have done a lot of work to ensure that everything gets addressed multiple times throughout the course of the year. It's a tool. It's not a be-all, end-all. We as teachers still have to do the work to make this really valuable, but I think it's a good starting point. My initial notes reading through the CED, we have to teach a pre-1200 unit. And it's going to take some work. And this is a place where I don't have any answers. I wish I did, but I don't. I'm thinking in terms of like calling it the great context to really motivate students to understand that this is important content. What do you think, Dylan? The great context, good title?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that like I'm looking at this, like the rough draft of the unit guides, and it even says unit 0.
Yeah.
Like I think telling students that this is important
Yeah.
is important. And I feel like modeling these first, I mean, it's technically periods 1 and 2, really, in what was AP World. I think modeling it after those two can be useful, but I think rather than teaching it exactly like period 1 and 2 were, we have to really specifically focus on the thematic important parts rather than like, for example, like students probably aren't going to gain a lot from learning about like everything about the Indus River Valley civilization, as opposed to if you spent maybe a class learning the Neolithic Revolution.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that, and also I think because it's technically not on the test anymore, I do definitely see students caring less, especially if they know that it's not on the test.
Yep.
But I think it's important for kids to know. I'm just curious as to how teachers are going to now find practice materials for the great context, since the College Board's only going to provide figuring for 1200 and forward.
Yeah, that's going to be a big challenge. There are previously published examples. Those things are less secure. So in terms of testing, I think we're all still in that same boat of not being able to rely on released College Board materials as though they were secure to students. But they do exist. They're out there. I also think because for those of us who teach AP World in a single year, and that's my situation, certainly, I think we're not ready for full-length essays or DBQs that early. So I don't need a ton of those same resources that I will really benefit from seeing for some of those later units. And I feel fairly confident in drawing on some of those earlier SAQs, some of those smaller pieces, those shorter practice elements to be really useful. I think there's a lot of fairly good release materials or practice materials out there relating to religions, for example, which is something we're going to definitely need to teach. The Neolithic Revolution has a handful of pretty good stuff out there as well. And, you know, if that's the one area where I have to write my own darn questions, I can probably hack it. Writing questions is not my strong suit at all, which is part of the reason I'm excited about these resources. But if I had to do it and I only had to do it for one unit, I think I could pull it together and be a professional about it.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go for it.
The one thing that I do really like about the new CED, despite all of the multiple issues, which I can rant about for days, are the fact that they incorporated, I'm trying to find like the page here, they don't just have like the comparison, causation, continuity, and change anymore. I like the fact that they have skills like, you know, sourcing and situation and argumentation integrated into the course, because I feel like that will make teaching writing a bit more natural, almost, because you can then say, oh, look at this page on this curriculum, you need to know this.
Yes.
And especially like I'm just curious, like when do you teach the LEQ or the DBQ, like in your class?
We do our first LEQ by October. So previously in Unit 2, I did my first LEQ. DBQ, I wait a little bit longer. We do smaller document analysis and then write a full DBQ by January. Has been my model.
Yeah, I know. I did something similar.
Yeah.
I know. I definitely find I can see with like these now technically 5 units, but 4 required units. I'm more worried that at least for my school, there are a lot more students taking AP World at my school, more because it's less of a, it's not less rigorous, but it's almost less college level, in the sense that, first of all, it doesn't teach all of history. So like in my class, we had 12 students, and now my teacher's going to have 35, which I mean still is not that much, but it's a lot more.
Right. I had 77 and I only had half of the AP World kids at my school. So, so we're numbers wise. Yeah.
But
I
she's
feel
used
like,
to
you
teaching
know,
a
that
class of like
it's
15.
growing. And there's trade-offs, and I think at this point it is what it is. And my hope in starting this conversation with teachers and with students tonight is thinking about, okay, how do we tackle this and make it meaningful? Because hopefully they're not going to change it again before next May, because I would die if they did. But the changes that are there, how do we make the best of them? So some positives in the CED. There are more illustrative examples given for some of the key concepts. And there's been a lot of talk in some of the teacher groups that I'm a part of about the emphasis in some of the earlier units on Southeast Asia in a big way, which I'm not really strong in, so I'm really excited to kind of be called out in this new CED and really challenged to make sure I'm teaching that content better than I have been. That said, after 1450, the structure of the course skews Eurocentric. Not all of the examples, but the kind of basic framing of the course. We're viewing things through the lens of Western domination. And so that becomes a place where we as teachers have to do the work. College Board isn't doing the work for us there. In fact, they're setting us up for a really Eurocentric way of viewing world history. And so we as teachers have to take that responsibility and say, no, the histories of non-European peoples, independent of their relationship to Europeans, is still really critical. And how do we examine that? How do we learn about that? And how do we challenge the common cultural narratives that exist about those time periods? Some variables teachers need to think about as we're pulling together this course. We are all looking at really different schedules. Some folks start August 1st. I don't start until the Wednesday after Labor Day. So we start late compared to a lot of schools in other parts of the country. And that has an impact on our calendar. It has an impact on what I choose to include and what I choose to let students learn on their own. And I want to say, especially if there's any new or newish teachers out there, you have to choose. You have to choose what to include and choose what to not include. And lots of people can give you advice on what's so important, and it's all so important, but you can't teach it all. So don't feel like you have to. What you need to do is give students the resources and the skills that they can learn it all. Yes, Eric's out there saying it, dare to omit. Absolutely, you have to, because we're all dealing with different start dates, different class lengths, different numbers of terms. Some people get to teach AP World over a 2-year span. Lucky you. And I mean that like in a genuine, non-sarcastic way. That's amazing that you have that opportunity. Some of you get to teach block schedules and do bigger projects. I've got 55 or 45-minute class periods, depending on the day of the week. I've got September to May, and that's all I've got. And so that impacts what I choose, and it's going to impact the examples that I'm going to bring you. You all need to choose what's right for you. We also have different students. Dylan, you took the class as a freshman. I teach sophomores, and that's going to, vary. People's skills are going to vary. People's previous experience, previous courses are going to vary really wildly. AP Culture and what does your overall school look like? Is AP World a class that everybody takes? Is it a class that only 12 students take? What does that look like? And so those are variables to keep in mind, and they're going to affect planning and pacing. They're going to affect how much time you spend on any particular thing. My students most recently had world history in the 7th grade, and they're coming to me as 10th graders. So I can't rely on them having learned anything that they will remember when they come into my class. I have to provide opportunities for them to do it all. And I think a lot of us are in similar boats nationwide, but not everybody. So if you're in a place where you have greater experience or older students, some of this may not apply as much to you. All right, next thing I want to talk about are some of the complications that go into planning this course. You can't organize your lessons by all of the possible ways. Like this is just a few different ways that you could organize your lessons. And thanks, Eric, for helping me with this slide, right? You can't organize everything by theme or by key concept or by the 6 new historical thinking skills or what we're now calling reasoning skills or by, like, it's too much. And the really good news is that we don't have to. We can use any of these things for what they're best for. Some lessons or some units lend themselves to one type of organization over others. Right now in my brainstorming, I'm thinking that my unit 0 should lend itself well to teaching the themes as well as teaching the content by theme. So spending some time thinking about what social structure means, what cultural institutions are, how state building happens, the relationship between humans and the environment, and pulling examples from that pre-1200 time period makes a lot of sense to me. You may find, given your particular resources or your particular background, that different things work better for you. And at this point, I'm going to pull in one more voice to help us start talking about some of these things in more practical terms. Eric, here we go. Eric, if you are ready to join us, we would love to have you whenever you are ready. Because we're going to dive into talking about some new units. And Eric and I have slightly different perspectives on these units, which is part of the reason I'm really excited to have him join us. Because he's got some really cool thoughts on this, and I've got what I hope are some really cool thoughts. Can you hear us, Eric? Awesome. We cannot hear you. Can you check and make sure you're not muted?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. How's it going?
All right. Hi.
This is the first time I think we've talked face to face, so it's nice to meet you.
I think so. I've heard you in some of the other streams before the test.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk units, what we think of them, what we like, what we don't like. So I made some unit guides because Jessica Furiosi on the AP World History Teachers Group made some really beautiful ones, and I wish I had her graphic design skill. They don't really match what I needed them for, so I was recreating my own. Things I like from the unit guides, I love the learning objectives. I love the language of explain, describe, identify. I think that's really powerful language, even though it, sometimes not always focused on the things that we want to focus on. I pulled key vocab out of the CED. I pulled historical developments and events out of the illustrative examples, and then I pulled in the key concepts from the old way of doing things because I just like to have all my resources available. Eric, you're not a super huge fan of these units. How are you looking at pulling stuff together given all these changes?
Yeah. No, I don't like the new units at all. I think from my perspective, the new units are meant to make things easier for people who are teaching to Eurocentric state standards. Like Aisha mentioned the techs in Texas in the chat, and I saw Dylan saying that the world history course that maybe precedes this is pretty much just European history. Whenever you see Renaissance or something, I just like, we're into that European tunnel of time. I love talking about the Renaissance. I used to teach AP Euro, but without going down that rabbit hole. I think it's one of those things or feudalism. Those are things that really will get your attention. So, but I think it's really the framing of it. So what I plan to do is just carry on, meaning the key concepts, by which I mean like the 3 or 4 for each period, like using those and going through the textbook kind of in order, but then having kids try to match up to read the textbook with those key concepts in mind.
Yes.
So, and it's a bigger problem for some than others. I think the first 3 are fine. It's interesting. I was a big part of Save AP World. And the units that we got created out of that movement, 1 and 2, are way more global than anything else in the whole class. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt, so here's an example from like the unit guides that I've been pulling together out of Unit 1, that global tapestry. And like I mentioned earlier, I felt really challenged in a positive way to do a better job with South Asia and with Southeast Asia. I know for myself that's a particular area of weakness, and I'm appreciating the impetus to go and do better in teaching about that part of the world. And it's definitely included as a specific region here in this Unit 1 that the College Board has handed us. These are some of Eric's concerns that he shared with me before we started. And yeah, so Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about like what you're noticing in terms of the framing of these units? I think you have a really like clear and concise way of describing this that people would benefit from hearing as an initial critique on these units.
Okay, sure. If you look at the first topic in each of those units, it pretty much looks exactly like the Western Civ class that I took in 1983. You know, so
Yeah.
I just feel, and it looks a lot like the Texas standards,
Mm-hmm.
which I think are pretty universally understood as being, not state of the art.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's that narrative that each unit then is going to start with like European action, and then the rest of the world reacts to that in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So in Unit 4, it starts out with, European ships.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of say like an alternative, what would an alternative way of framing that look like? Well, at some point, when I was in high school in 83, we said age of discovery. And then at
Right.
some point we realized, well, there's already people in those places, so we should call it age of exploration. But really what we're talking about is sailing. And
Yeah.
so I've started calling it like age of voyaging and bringing in like the Vikings, including all that stuff together, Zhang Ha and the Chinese, Polynesians,
Yeah.
which is just, that stuff is tons of fun to talk about because it's so intense, that Polynesian wayfaring. So that's the thing. People were going farther on boats. Like, that's the deal. And that doesn't mean that the European stuff isn't important, because of course, like Columbus is hugely consequential. So it's really just how do you frame it? Do you have European action and the rest of the world reacting? Or do we have like a global situation where we talk about how different people would have experienced some of these things?
And I think it gets even further exacerbated when we get into the 19th and 20th century units, where we see the framing around like the Industrial Revolution, starting with European action, and then the rest of the world reacts, as opposed to seeing the Industrial Revolution as a reaction to Europeans' desire to compete at a level they've never been able to compete before.
Right. Like, here's this random fun fact, but when the English East India Company first arrives in Bengal looking for cloth, there's 25 times as many people living in the Mughal Empire as there are in England.
Yeah.
Like, so that's 1600. That's halfway through, the whatever period that is now, the 1450 to 1750 period. I guess it's the new period too, the old period 4. But by the end of the period, things are different. Okay, but if you frame that whole period around the rise of Europe, you're basically missing the dynamics in the first half of the period. So you shouldn't, like, it's not a question of not covering Europe. It's just delaying those developments until they're actually what's really important.
I think too, depending on what textbooks we're using, we can either get help or not from those resources. I'm teaching out of Strayer, Ways of the World. And I think Strayer's biggest weakness is Africa and Latin America. They're like thrown in at the end of each time period, the way he lays out his textbook. But he doesn't always start with Europe. And I do appreciate that. And as I'm going to show a couple of examples of some calendaring I've been doing in a little bit, by reorienting some of these units to align with my textbook order, I'm finding I actually get a little bit of support from Strayer to flip that language and to be more global, to say, hey, let's talk about Haiti before we talk about industrialization, right? Talk about like political revolutions in Latin America, and indigenous contributions to some of those movements, and some of that stuff that I think is, I'm getting some help there. And depending on what books other people are using, that's an encouragement I would put out there to teachers. You may also get some help from the sources.
Yeah. Yeah, any textbook's going to have strengths and weaknesses, so it's really just finding that sweet spot of letting it be useful without becoming dependent. It's interesting hearing you say that about Strayer. I wish that we had adopted Strayer, but we adopted Bentley. And the thing that I liked about Strayer was that it showed those connections between places.
Yes.
More like it's more world history as opposed to history of places around the world.
Yes.
Which Bentley kind of tends toward, now we're going to talk about China. Now we'll talk about Africa.
On connections, and I see Gayla in the chat saying that the 3rd edition of Strayer maybe is stronger on some of those regions. I'm using the 1st edition because we can't afford new books.
Word.
Yeah. Students asked, they're like, "You're getting a new course, Mrs. Longnecker. Do you get new textbooks too?"
Like, silly kids.
It was sweet of them to say it. And maybe, yeah, so Strayer folks out there, if you're in the 3rd edition, maybe you've got even better support in terms of global connections, in which case, yay, someday, maybe I'll catch up to you and get an edition of Strayer I love.
But that's what we can do in class. So if the textbook's not making that, the textbook's are ultimately a resource.
Right.
So it's just one resource. It's not the only resource. So it's like if the textbook isn't doing it, well, then we can do that, right? Comparison, right? Yep. That's a thing. So, then you can have kids, there's lots of, teacher strategies for doing that.
It sounds like with the online resources from the College Board, teachers are going to be able to pick and choose and actually assign some of those resources out to students specifically. So you don't have to be using their suggested unit guides in order to take advantage of some of those online resources for student practice. That was something I was really nervous about going in, was I going to have to use their prepackaged stuff in order to gain access to their resources? And the best I can tell is that they're not independent, but they're not inherently connected. So we're going to have some freedom there with that resource as well, which as somebody who's not a strong question writer, I'm excited about that. So let me show you my calendars. These are horribly, horribly rough, but they give you a sense of my thought process and where I've been working with this, because unlike Eric, I'm not quite ready to abandon the suggested units yet. I want to give them a try and see if I can get enough good out of them to make them useful. So my priorities, I privilege skill building during my class time over content delivery. My students are expected to read nightly. I assign 5 to 8 pages of textbook reading. I said Strayer Ways the World, 1st edition, so that class time is spent on skills instead of lecture 98% of the time. And that may not be how you teach, anybody out there, but that's how I teach, and it's how I'm comfortable. It's my teaching partner is the same way, so that works for us. So then for us, because we're privileging skill building, we want to build in time to use those progress checks. We want to build in time for writing workshops, whether it's document analysis or essay planning, essay revising. We actually do an assignment where students write their own short answer questions that they then assign to their teammates to get some deeper understanding of the skills that go into answering those questions. So some of that is reflected in my calendar in terms of using less time for some of the content delivery. I also, in my calendars, I just like to be really transparent with people that I keep big breaks for family time. So my calendars keep Thanksgiving, winter break, and spring break as no homework times, which is somewhat controversial when I talk to other AP teachers about it. So I'm just letting you know that's my bias. I push kids really hard during the times that we are working, and then I try to honor that time that they have with their families. And it's so far been a really good balance. I got thank you notes when I sent an email to parents telling them that it was true their students didn't have homework over winter break. So that told me that we were working just hard enough at that point. And then the other thing that affects my timelines as I'm working through these is that I set aside review time. I did 5 weeks of review this year because it worked out for us to do that. The way things are looking now, because I tried before, because I knew I was going to do this session, tried to calendar out as far as I could in advance. It looks like we'll get maybe 3.5 weeks of review. And some of you are thinking that that's way too much. And some of you might be thinking that's way too little. I'm just throwing that out there as something that I really care about, because it is probably the biggest confidence booster that I've been able to give my students, is that intentional review time. So it's worth thinking about as you're calendaring. Gail is asking 5 to 8 pages a night. Yep, 5 to 8 pages a night. We pull it off with roughly that much. Third edition, I think the chapters are broken down a little bit differently, so you might end up with more pages or less pages. I don't know particularly. But my process for creating these calendars, I first went through before I get into process, Rashawn has a great question about reading discussions. I do set aside class time for reading discussions on a regular basis, not necessarily daily, but on a regular basis, because I'm asking them to read every single night. We try to check in with their reading, and then whatever activity skill building wise we're doing, I try to link back to the previous night or the previous couple of nights to do that. My reason for 5 to 8 pages instead of assigning by chapter, and Eric, I'd be curious to know how you deal with reading, because I hear from a lot of people, I struggle to get kids to read every night. I give them the calendar and I say, here are your reading assignments for the month. Actually, I give them a monthly calendar with all of the reading assignments pre-published so that they can adjust them as needed. But by assigning it in chunks nightly, it's manageable for students who are going to do it every night. And then students who need to take a night off can do longer chunks at their own discretion. It's part of teaching time management.
Right, it's tough. I mean, I would say that it's just an ongoing struggle.
Yep.
I'm working with 11th graders. There's pros and cons there. Obviously, they've had a push, some of them, or AP or regular U.S. history. So they have more context that way, and they're better readers.
Yeah.
You're learning more vocab. They can read more fluently. But the downside is they're busier. The thing, a lot of sophomores have 1, maybe 2 AP kind of classes.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas, my kids, a lot of my kids have AP Lang and Comp, and that class is a beast.
Oh, yeah.
And then many of them are doing college bio. We don't do AP bio. We do a dual credit bio class, which is great, and a lot of kids learn a lot and they get credit and everything. But, they're more likely to be in a varsity sport or the top, performing music. So it's, kind of pros and cons. So I assign chapters, and then I have the kids do no count. I record them in the grade book, the scores on practice quizzes, online practice quizzes. Mostly don't have stimulus. And I do that through Moodle. It's a platform you use, but it could be Schoology or it could be whatever.
Yeah.
And then I reach out to families if kids aren't doing their practice work, just to let them know. I tell the kids, if you have to pay to take this class in college, I don't know who's writing the check, but I know it's not me. So I feel like your family has a right to know if you're kind of blowing this up. Because in Minnesota, kids get credit for 3 at state schools. So, I mean, really, a junior who does their reading is going to get a 3 in the AP World Test, pretty much. So, yeah, in any case, but it's a struggle. A lot of kids don't do it, and then they, so you don't want to be grading. I don't want to grade homework for a whole bunch of reasons. So
yeah, I think whatever works for your school, your students, the culture in your community is the right way to do it. But yeah, so you'll see on my calendar though that I'm doing it by page number chunks. So I took the College Board units, laid them all out with my best guess of how many days any given topic might take. And then I did it all on little Post-it notes so that I could physically move them around, because I realigned my units by textbook order. And I hear a lot from people about abandoning the textbook order and teaching it in the order that makes the most sense to you. And if you are comfortable with that, I'm all in favor of it. I find that, especially with Strayer, his voice is so clearly building an argument over the course of a unit. And he's making so many references back. I'd imagine that Bentley's not a whole lot different, that students really benefit from reading the textbook in order. So I rearranged things in order. And now I got to figure out what I'm actually going to do. So this is what it looks like for September right now. I've only got a week and a half set aside right now for my pre-1200 unit. I think that seems slight. So I'm trying to figure out where to buy back some time later in the year so that I can shift that around at the beginning. But it was the rough draft, see where I'm at kind of a thing. You can see that there's a couple of reading assignments stuck over there on a Sunday. Those are reading assignments that didn't fit with particular suggested units in the CED, but that I know as a teacher are really important pieces of content to give my students. And so now I got to figure out, by making a Post-it for each of those, I said to myself, I need to figure out where to include these, how to move this stuff around. And that's the next thing my teaching partner and I need to do as we start making a real calendar, is to take what we've been given and use what works and abandon what doesn't. You can see in September there that there's a couple of sections that I've marked as that I don't have page numbers with, because the textbook doesn't have good readings about those regions of the world. But the College Board has reminded me that I need to really teach those. So I got to figure out what I want to do with those. October isn't a whole lot different. Some places where I'm noticing there needs to be some supplemental work, some supplemental reading. The pink Post-its are places where I'm thinking, various assessment kinds of things. I built in lots of assessment time in this rough draft, so that I could buy back, by cutting assessments down, I could buy back content time later on. Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's super rough. I was almost not going to share these with you, but then I figured, see the rough draft, see the process. If it helps anybody in your own process, then I'm glad I did it. If you look at it and you're like, that's a mess, that woman's crazy, that's fine. I probably am. It's okay. Yeah. I see a question in the little question box. I'm going to pull it up here and just see. Sage asked, what changes can be expected for some of us students in regard to the course? I, as a freshman, finished the full course this last year, and a friend of mine came halfway through the year already taking US history and will be taking AP Modern next year. What advice can be expected to still hold up from last year to this upcoming one, and what will change? Dylan, you can probably speak to some of this as well, but I would say all of the skill building stuff that students have been doing in the past is going to be the same. It's just majorly different content depending on where you are and who's teaching it. But advice for students as they're thinking about advising their friends and siblings about this new course?
I'm trying to think. They're not changing the format of the exam.
Nope, thankfully.
So I believe, really, thank God, for the first time in 5 years.
Not this year.
Suddenly, November, we're gonna see, synthesis has been added back. It's gonna there we go, knock on wood real quick.
Yeah.
The test isn't changing, so the skills aren't necessarily changing. So in terms of what you are going to be expected to do isn't going to change. So still knowing how to read a stimulus or look through a stimulus, answer a multiple choice question, write a short answer question, and write those essays, all with that timing, are still going to be necessary in order to succeed on this exam. And then also, I know they're cutting down, but the content is majorly changed, but I think in general, it's similar to periods 3 through 6.
Yep.
In terms of the overall looking at it, it might be Eurocentric and it might be not great, but it's still very similar, in my opinion, to what I learned in my AP World class, which was last year.
Yeah.
The one gripe I do have, which I saw on your calendar, not with your calendar, but with the actual
You can
curriculum.
write with my calendar, Dylan. I can take it.
But, all right, here we go. All right, now, so the one gripe I have with the curriculum is kind of the like regionalization of it. It's like what Eric was saying, how it's like, oh, today we're going to be learning about Africa. Today we're going to be learning about Egypt, the Middle East. Like I feel like it's going to cause a lack in connection with students, because I can definitely see myself thinking, oh, in China Buddhism's happening, and then in the Middle East Islam's happening. And then being like two separate events. Those are two different things, and there's no connection between China and the Middle East, which is horrifically wrong.
Yeah.
And so I can definitely see that regionalization causing issues.
Yeah.
Especially with certain students. And the one thing that I saw in your calendar, which I'm curious about, is there's kind of still been like a debate in my head. Obviously, I'm not an AP World teacher, so I'm not going to have to deal with this, next year. But
not yet.
Not yet, really. Is the fact that I saw that you were doing tests, or I guess progress checks, for each of the 9 units, I figure. Mm-hmm. It's kind of been a debate in my mind whether or not, I was talking actually with my AP World teacher about this earlier, the debate between, do you do a test for each unit or do you do a test for each time period?
That's a conversation my teaching partner and I are having. The kind of the pro-con list that we're looking at right now, pros of breaking it into 9 units instead of 4 time periods is more frequent assessment and smaller chunks of knowledge. Multiple choice tests have been probably the single factor that drives students away from the course.
Oh yeah.
In my class, kids who want to drop at the end of semester often cite, I can't get my test scores above a 60%, and they struggle with that. So having more frequent, smaller assessments suggests, or to me, is something that might be a positive. The downside on that is lacking connections across a time period and in between units, especially if you look at the 1450 to 1750 time period. It's organized as land empires and maritime empires, and not understanding that those are groups of people who are in fact interacting with one another. And
right.
No,
I don't know about that. I mean,
now, come on.
Right. So we're not sure yet how we're going to tackle it. We've talked about the idea of maybe doing some progress checks in those smaller units and then a bigger time period test, which again, like I was saying, is a place where we could buy back some of that time for a unit 0. It's so hard for me right now to make decisions without seeing all of the resources available to me. And that's, that's why that's why I'm showing you my nasty rough draft calendars, so that you can see I'm not an expert. I'm not somebody, the College Board certainly probably wouldn't even approve of me doing this because I'm not one of their trained trainers. I'm just a teacher who's trained to figure this out for myself. And I started with, okay, what would it look like if I did it the way the CED is recommending? And as I'm talking with people, as I'm talking with you all, as I'm reading what's happening in the chat and thinking about things, I'm already starting to see places where I could make improvements and adjustments. And my calendars will definitely look different by September, but this is where I started. And this is how the CED is helping me frame my thinking going forward. Because more than anything, I think everybody needs to read the CED so that you're not missing something, especially in terms of the places where changes are happening. I see lots of great suggestions people are having about assessments and different ways of going about things in the chat. So thank you all for continuing to talk about that. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, I like the suggestion in the chat there from Devin and other people with variations on that, where you're kind of mixing the different formats. So some things covering longer chunks, or working on the the SAQs, LAQs, DBQs as you go through. The thing I was thinking from before too was someone asked about their friend who's taking the class is It's still like when the students are doing the reading, it's like one of the things that I find, let me back up. One of the things that students report to me a lot who struggle with the reading, like kids who are willing to do the reading, but struggle with feeling like it's useful, is they're not sure what's important.
Yes.
So some kids, what happens is they burn out because they start out and they try to remember everything and read everything. And in September, when they're not that busy, you know, they can kind of do that and they're eager and have lots of energy. Time they get to October and all these other classes have cranked up and projects and life.
The October slump. Yep.
Yep. So, but so that's all leading up to then. The advice is, what are the big ideas? And that's what I like about the key concepts, but I know you could find the learning objectives or some other thing within a different class structure. And then it's like, just, you don't have to know everything. You know, I graded the SAQ remotely this year. I did question 1 from the operational, which is public, everyone can see, and it was on nomadic empires and sedentary peoples. And the range of examples the kids used, well, since it's the old course, it went back to like Indo-Europeans and Hittites, of course, tons of Mongols. But there was just lots of different examples, and nobody needs to know all of them. Like, can you grasp this big idea, and can you support it with an example?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's really, and I've done these self-assessment sheets where I had the key concepts on there with the examples, and the kids would assess themselves. And tomorrow, one of the reasons I was interested in doing this tonight, tomorrow I'm getting together with my teaching partners, another person in my building, and then someone in my district who I do plan everything with. The 3 of us, and we're gonna get together and kind of talk a little bit about what to do, but is how can we retool those to make it easier for kids? They know what to take notes on, which things, you know, if I'm reading a textbook right now in the class, like as someone who's been through college and been a teacher, you know, I'm going to skim some parts, I'm going to bear down on other parts, I'm going to write, you know, and so but that's a developed skill. So helping kids develop skills is so important. So having the kids show me their notes is one of the ways that I do that.
I'm leaning towards some of those learning objectives. I think that there's too many of them and can maybe be pared down and scaled down. But again, I love the verbs in the learning objectives that give students something to grab onto. Okay, I need to be able to explain this thing about Song Dynasty China, or I need to identify these causation factors about this particular topic. So yeah, absolutely. I think finding ways, either through the learning objectives, through the key concepts, to point students toward what's really important. And you still need to read, but you don't have to read everything as deeply. And then teaching that. And we spend a lot of time early in the year doing that together. And it's exhausting.
It is. Because
by April, they're really good at it. And
that's
I tell them that for months. I'm like, by April, you're going to be good at this. By April, you're going to be good at this. And then April comes along and they're like, hey, I'm kind of good at this.
That's great. Yeah, my hope is for that part to become automatic. Again, with the 11th graders, it should happen sooner, but because then the real work of the class is like looking at images, reading primary source text, you know, comparing secondary source interpretations. I mean, that's what I want them to like pour their energy into.
Yes.
The other stuff should kind of just be background, but I just haven't quite gotten. And the other thing I do is I have these short, like 10 slide presentations for each chapter in the book that highlights here where the key concepts, you know, like the 3 big ideas for this unit, here's where they show up in this chapter.
I love that.
So this is the stuff to look for. And I think what I want to do then in this coming year, since we'll be using the same book, this is maybe one of my motives for keeping the key concept structure, is then to flip that, do like 10, 15-minute screencasts on those and be like, you should do this, look at this before you read, so you know what you're reading for. So yeah, so here's where, so it's not like in-depth like notesy stuff. I'll even tell them I don't even care if you take notes when I do them in class, you know, just, but some kids like to. Some kids will print those out and then take their reading notes on top of them, which I think is useful.
I have printed out the key concepts and have been using those as I call them the cover page for the unit. And I tell students, this is your study guide. When you're going back through your notes to study for your test, annotate back and forth, annotate on the cover page, take your key concepts and annotate them into your notes. And the students who do it find it really beneficial. You know, they're kids, not all of them do it, but can't control everything. Yeah. So Stacy's got a really excellent question, and I think we can end with a little talk about this. I don't have a good answer for you, Stacy, but Eric has already typed a great answer into the chat. Is about what do we do with the old periods 1 and 2? How do we decide what to emphasize? And I absolutely agree with Eric's idea to look in the CED and find any places where the College Board references continuities. And then take those things back into. So we know that religions are going to be important, and giving some foundations about the beliefs and practices of our major world traditions. I think some of the regional cultural continuities beyond religion. I think some of the political continuities. You know, thinking about China and the dynastic cycle and the mandate of heaven and kind of the building up of all of that. I think using your textbook to teach the world religions, because at least my textbook teaches the world religions in a historical context, not just a list of beliefs for each of the world religions. I think that's going to be really helpful because it reminds students that all of this is happening in a historical place and time, not just here's this list of facts you need to know. But in terms of like which example civilizations I'm going to pull from units 1 and 2, I still don't know. And I'm going to be tuning into the next live stream when someone talks about that, because that's what
I think one of the things I've thought about with that is finding some kind of key foundational texts like from period 1 or maybe period 2 to use for each of those areas. So in the past and in my regular world history class, I use a little bit from the Rig Veda, like one of the earliest Vedas that goes through the caste system. But it has this whole creation myth about this giant god Purusha, and then the Purusha's body's cut up and all this stuff. So it really helps kids see how this, you know, some of that development. So maybe use that. There's one I like that I got on the Asia for Educators site, AFE, at Columbia, which is great. Totally recommend that for anybody looking for stuff. Yeah, it's the go-to spot. But there's one in there on duties of the Chinese emperor that kind of it's got some Confucianism sort of stuff in there. So so like you're saying from the textbook, Melissa, like organically talking about these things opposed to here's what Buddhists believe. Not really. Like you want to have that, you know, people kind of understand things in context. I think that's one thing that I'll kind of do is let's look at these sources and then really contextualize that source. And then the context of the source also becomes context for the class. Yeah. AFE, East Asia. It's good stuff.
I think I'm seeing a lot of people mentioning the struggle of trying to teach from the AMSCO book. And I think that your advice to pull primary sources for teaching some of this foundational stuff is really good advice, especially if you're in a situation of using the AMSCO book, because it isn't as strong as some of the more traditional textbooks in terms of putting systems and beliefs and practices in historical context. But the actual historical context in the primary sources could be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. You know, if I was using that, then I think I would, you know, obviously more primary sources like you're saying, people are saying, but also secondary sources too. Let's take a look at like a more sophisticated secondary source interpretation, whether that's a book chapter or an article, something that the hashtag WAPChat. People on Twitter turned me on to this year was the Southernization article,
Love
which
that
is
article.
circa 1200. Yeah, I used that for the first time this year, and
Oh,
wow, that was like one of the best recommendations
oh yeah.
that I got. So I could recommend that.
Yep.
There's also a David Christian article I want to use, Step Roads or Silk Roads.
Yes. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, so that's something that's new to me. So I would, and in the Facebook group, or I haven't used the professional community in a while, so maybe I'll check that out. Or like on Twitter, I'm very active on Twitter.
Yep.
Then it just finds some of those other secondary sources, like your textbook. Like if the textbook is too juvenile, potentially. I mean, sorry if that's too harsh, but well, that's fine. Then that's another it's just a resource for kids. So if they can get through that easily, but maybe not get enough depth, well, that's okay. And then you just what are you going to build onto that?
Yes. The David Christian article, I don't have the direct link to it, but I know I've seen it at the Big History Project, which is a place where I've pulled some Big History. It doesn't really line up with AP World curriculum, but Big History has a lot of stuff that does a lot of good connecting work across time periods. I've pulled some of their articles on Africa in particular this past year. The David Christian article is, what is it? From Silk Roads to Step Roads.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I know that they have it on the Big History Project.
Okay.
Anything on Big History is free PDFs. You can make an account as a teacher for free, and you have full access to all of their resources. Even if you're not teaching
I was looking for a PDF of that, and I hadn't found it.
Yep.
It's not yeah. Thanks, Bill Gates. So, no, seriously, Bill Gates did the book on or course on tape, great courses thing on Big History.
Yeah.
Like David Christian's courses, thought it was terrific, and wrote a giant check, which didn't bounce, right? So
right.
Right.
It's a good. I find it to be a good supplement to what the resources I've got in my classroom. Big History is one of the things I use a lot for my on-level world history as well, because many of the readings are either more directly scaled to high school reading levels, or some of the resources are even scalable. You can choose your reading level, and it will revise the language, which if you're teaching on-level world history along with your APs, that might be a real benefit for some folks. All right. Well, any final thoughts, Dylan or Eric? I think we've started a really good conversation, and we should definitely come back to it another time, but maybe here's a good ending point for tonight.
Yeah,
good. I wrote a lot recently about this to sort my thoughts, so I'll drop a link to those blog posts in the chat.
You should definitely read Eric's blog posts. He has put a lot of thought into this and given me a lot to think about too.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've been working on stuff regarding this since I'm saying a little over a year now since the petition hit and all that stuff happened, and so so I know this has kind of been all in my head for the past year. So it's kind of weird to now see it coming to fruition.
Yeah.
And kind of seeing I'm that stressful excitedness you get. I'm almost, because I'm not a teacher, I kind of get to watch this from the sidelines, and whatever happens, I don't have to blame myself. So I mean, if it does crash and burn, it's technically my fault.
Yeah.
But let me just wrap this real quick, even though it's dead. But it's exciting to see what's going to happen, and I'm kind of anticipatory of I'm curious to, since I hope to help out my AP World teacher next year with her, teaching and with the classes now that she has to teach, because I really want to see what happens. I want to see, if the new standards work, if they don't work, I'm curious to see actually if teachers just blatantly ignore the College Board. I know what Eric was saying, how he's going to continue just using kind of key concept-esque things, whereas what's going to happen if a teacher, especially new teachers, I'm curious to see what they do, first year teachers who are teaching AP World without this prior experience of, key concepts or the previous tests. And so,
yeah, and that's ultimately, I think an experienced person, like Melissa, who's, if you're going to use those units, but also problematize them a little bit for students and like play around with them a little bit and say, here's a different way to look at it. Like, I mean, I think that's fine. If you read my bid, it's really strongly worded, but I'm just trying to lay out a position. But my real sadness is how the course there'll be more people teaching the course who come to it, see those Eurocentric state standards, which are probably a lot like what they did in high school themselves.
Yeah.
And don't have that sort of transformational experience of looking at world history, the world and history in a different way that a lot of us who taught the class had.
Yeah.
Have been part of the students. So.
And I think that's where communities are going to be really critical. I think that as experienced teachers, I mean, that's why I'm having a live stream and showing you my gross rough drafts of stuff, is because I feel a responsibility to participate in community with other teachers and to say, hey, this isn't the only way. It's not even necessarily the right way, but this is what I'm thinking about. What are you thinking about? This is why I was so glad when Eric, who has a really different view for me about parts of this, wanted to come on the live stream with me and talk together, because we're all professionals. We can all do this work. And if we do the work and don't just ask for it to be handed to us, we can make it meaningful for our students, regardless of what we do or don't receive from the College Board.
Yeah, definitely. And I think looking at this from a student perspective myself, it's kind of different, because I know you guys are stressed about, how am I going to teach this course? What's going to happen to my students? Are scores going to be increased, decreased? And now I'm looking at this as a student. Even though I've taken world history, I kind of look at this through a student-based lens of like, will I be able to effectively learn the concepts? Will my teacher be able to effectively deliver the content? So it's almost like I'm worried for my fellow students next year.
Yeah. Students, you got to trust your teachers, and hopefully you've got good ones, but there's a lot of really great people out here teaching AP World, and I think this is the year where we're going to have to trust each other a little bit and trust each other to do the work that is important. But we can get there.
We can do it.
And there'll be Fiveable streams all.
And there'll be Fiveable streams. That's right. We're going to be here helping out from our end as well. Absolutely.
And for teachers too, going through the summer, that's the next step, or one of the next steps for Fiveable is planning those things. But those are coming. So.
Yeah.
More things like this to talk and share.
Exactly. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks to Dylan and to Eric for coming on screen and helping me out. I look forward to joining all of you in more conversations a little bit later. And I hope that you either have ended or do end your school year as well. And I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
See ya.